We're about to have an interview with Dr. Walter Block, and we're going to be talking about his book, The Case for Discrimination. He is a chair and professor of economics at the College of Business in Loyola University in New Orleans. He's a senior fellow at the Mises Institute, and he's authored over 24 books that you can also find on Mises.org. Did I miss anything?
No, that pretty much sums me up.
Awesome. Okay. And so basically I read this book a few years ago and I just skimmed over it again just to prepare some questions for today. But basically what is the idea? What's the thesis, the main idea of your book?
Well, the main idea of pretty much all my books, although maybe not all, just the ones on political philosophy, is libertarianism. And what libertarianism is the non-aggression principle and private property rights. So I look at everything through the eyeglasses of the non-aggression principle. And I find that murder and rape and theft and slavery are evil and abominations because they violate the non-aggression principle. Whereas eating vanilla ice cream and tying your shoes is not evil and abomination because they don't violate the non-aggression principle. So now I ask, well, suppose I discriminate. Is it per se a violation of the non-aggression principle? And I can't see how it is because to violate the non-aggression principle, you have to hit somebody or knife them or shoot them or engage in fraud against them or something, whereas to discriminate against them means you just don't want to have anything to do with them. But we have no obligation to be friends with or business associates with anyone. If we want to be a hermit, we discriminate against everyone in the human race. And if discrimination is unlawful, then hermits should be put in jail for not bothering anyone, which is, a little crazy. Mm-hmm. I notice, I'm follically challenged. You're not. You have a head of hair, and I'm now going to discriminate against everyone with a head of hair. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Did I violate their rights? Did I engage in physical abuse against them? No. So if I want to discriminate against gays or straights or men or women or God knows what, people with hair, people with 2 feet, people with 1 foot, I can discriminate against them, and I shouldn't be put in jail. And the libertarian question is, under what conditions is the use of violence justified? And it sure as hell is justified against murderers and rapists, but it's not justified against the victimless crimes, like, say, prostitution between consenting adults or drugs, or discrimination. So I claim that discrimination is a victimless crime, and that would be my thesis.
Okay, and so just real quick, I guess to get this out of is your view of libertarianism or government or whatever is that there's no government at all, or are we talking about applying the non-aggression principle with the government that we have today?
Well, I hate to get involved in two different issues. I like to put the blinders on like a horse has blinders and, focus on one issue at a time. As it happens, I'm an anarchist libertarian. I believe that anarchism is the only system fully compatible, but I don't really want to, unless you want to, I don't really want to get off into that issue.
No, that's perfect, because that's what I'm trying to get at, because if you said otherwise, I would have to make an argument, I suppose, that, because I guess my problem with this idea of the discrimination is that, well, what happens if the government has discriminated against a specific group over time?
The government. Well,
right.
I'm just talking about individuals.
Okay.
I don't think the government should discriminate at all. First of all, I don't think it should exist. But
See, that helps.
Given that it exists, I don't think the government should have a rule saying, that the speed limit for white people is 70 miles an hour and the speed limit for black people is, I don't know, whatever, some different amount. Or that the penalty for a white rapist is 10 years and the penalty for a black rapist is different than 10 years, whether more or less, it doesn't matter. Whites can vote and blacks can't vote or anything like that. I think the government should not discriminate. I was talking about individuals, legitimate individuals, and I don't think the government is a legitimate organization. So I see why you're bringing in anarchism. I take back my horses, whatever. So I was talking about just individuals. Should an individual be put in jail for discriminating? And I say no. Is it licit? Is it proper for the government to discriminate? No. The government should be colorblind and blind in every other way. Well, I don't mean blind, literally blind, but they shouldn't look at irrelevancies. And skin color is irrelevant. Now, whether you murder or not, that's relevant. So if they put a murderer in jail, that's fine, because, murder is a violation of the non-aggression principle, but they should give the same penalty to men and women and people follically challenged and people not follically challenged. So the government should not discriminate.
Okay. Now, is there a difference between discrimination and racism?
Well, it's sort of unclear what is racism. Lou Rockwell just wrote a magnificent piece on what is racism. And what he said is racism is thinking ill of or wishing ill of a certain race and using violence against them. And thinking ill of, I think, is okay. I mean, you can think anything you want, and you shouldn't go to jail for it. What is it when you stick a pin in a doll? Voodoo? I mean, let's say you're a racist against, Orientals. So you make an Oriental doll and you stick a pin in it. Are you a criminal? Well, voodoo doesn't work. Let's stipulate that. If voodoo worked,
let's assume that.
a different universe. In the Bible it says, don't covet. Well, I think you can covet all you want. Just keep your mitts to yourself. So I think thinking is part of racism. Namely, if you think that all Orientals or all blacks or all Italians or all Jews are an abomination and you hate them and you're seething with hatred, oh, I hate them, that makes you a racist, but it shouldn't be illegal because you're just thinking. Now, if you start hanging people or start murdering people or start, the blacks had this thing, can you punch a white man once and knock him down or something? Did you hear about that? Yeah. Well, that's racism of a different sort. So I would say if racism is defined as hating people, hate all you want. That's compatible with libertarianism. And it is part of racism, I think, that if you hate a certain race, you're a racist to that extent. But that would be legitimate racism, so to speak, because it doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. But then the other part of racism, as Lou defines it, and I agree with him, is using violence against a despised minority group. And once you do that, you're violating the non-aggression principle. And that should be strictly illegal and dealt with by the full extent of the law.
Okay, so there was a recent study, and it had to do with they were like showing pictures of they were selling iPods on eBay or something. This was of the study, and they would show a white hand. They would show a white hand with tattoos, and then they would show a black hand. And what ended up coming out was eventually that what it showed, the study showed, was that people generally, I guess, bought less iPods from the black people who were selling the products than from the white person, even the white person with the tattoo, although that was sort of similar, but it was still much worse for the black individual. And so that is discrimination, right? And I'm just, right, and that's okay. Like we're okay.
Well, I wouldn't say it's okay. I would just say you shouldn't be put in jail for that.
Okay.
You're not violating the non-aggression principle. Look, let me give you another example. Forget about race for the second. We'll get back to race, but let's talk about sex for the moment.
Okay.
Male homosexuals are discriminating because they rule out half the human race, namely all women. Female homosexuals, lesbians, are also discriminators because they rule out half the human race for personal loving relationships. The same for male and female heterosexuals. They each rule out a different half of the human race. The only people who don't are bisexuals, because bisexuals will be open to a male or a female, but even they discriminate in favor of, lookism, handsome people or good-looking people or people with a sense of humor or intelligent people or whatever the ordinary person discriminates in favor of. I'm sure bisexuals discriminate in the same way. So if you want to see, to me, the libertarian issue is, who do you put in jail? And should we put everyone who's not a bisexual in jail? Well, of course not. That's lunatic. Therefore, discrimination should be legal. Now, it might not be nice, and I don't say it's okay, but as a libertarian, I have to put the blinders on again, the horse's blinders, and limit myself to the question of not whether things are okay or whether I like them personally, but rather, do they violate the non-aggression principle? And discrimination does not, whether it's race or sex. Now, suppose I see a black hand offering me, what was it, a book or something, or
iPod.
And I don't trust blacks. I'm a racist. I think it's a little despicable, personally. But as a libertarian, I have no problem with that. Namely, I don't think I should go to jail for it. Now, on the other hand, there is, maybe I was too fast in saying despicable, because who is it? I think Jesse Jackson once said that if he saw 3 young black men wearing hoodies down one street and 3 Hasidic Jewish young men down the other street, which street would he go to feel safer? And he said the Hasidic young men have a much lower crime rate than young black men have a higher crime rate. And he, a black leader, would feel safer. I think it was him. I'm not sure. But forget about him. I would feel safer with 3 young Hasidic white males than 3 young black men, because young black men have a much higher, disproportionate higher criminal record. And if I wanted to be safe, I would go with 3 Oriental men or 3 girls or, 3 women. Is that discriminatory? Yeah. Is it racist? Well, it doesn't depict hatred. It just depicts you want to be safe. And it certainly isn't a violation of their rights. So I would have to say, according to this definition, it's not racist to use race as a signifier or as a cheap, what's the word I'm looking for? A cheap discriminator, or looking at a person's skin is very cheap. You don't have to give them a survey or ask them if, any questions. You just look at their skin. So it's a very cheap way of discriminating. And I don't think it's racist according to the definition I'm using, and I certainly don't think it would violate the libertarian law code.
Okay, so, but from a progressive point of view, like from the opposite side of just thinking, okay, if the goal was to try to solve this or to try to fix it or to try to at least lessen discrimination in the workplace or with the iPod scenario, shouldn't the government step in to then say that, I don't know, like I don't know specifically what they would do, but something to help that individual, maybe to give him a loan or I don't know, something to help him sell that iPod, to make it easier to sell it, to put him on a level playing field with the other people?
Let me give you an example that Walter Williams offers. Do you know who Walter Williams is?
Yes, I do.
Black theoretician, libertarian. He says, I'll give you $100, go to a college campus, and find somebody who can dunk a basketball and find someone else who can solve a quadratic equation. And you can't talk to them. You can't say, are you a math major? Or are you a member of the basketball team? You just have to pick them out based on how they look. And what Walter Williams says, he picks some black kid to dunk the basketball, and he picks some Oriental kid with thick glasses to solve the quadratic equation. Now, should we solve this problem? Well, yeah, I suppose, I don't think we should solve it, but if we wanted to solve it, what we would do is make black people wear heavy leaded shoes so that they can't jump. And
to make it fair for the white people.
Right. I mean, look at the NBA. It's like 85% of black men are in the National Basketball Association. So if we're going to solve that, we got to make black men wear heavy lead boots so they can't jump and they can't run. And if we're going to solve the problem of Orientals being good at math, I don't know, we have to make them wear headphones where the noise, keep giving them a headache or something like that. There was a Kurt Vonnegut, Welcome to the Monkey House, or some short story, something like that. We had a handicapper general who was trying to make people equal. And that was the way, you solve these problems, by giving people lead boots or headache earphones or something like that. What I'm really trying to say is that there's nothing to solve. Different people are better at different things. Thomas Sowell, another hero of mine, another black theoretician, economist, says that people are different. The Italians go to all sorts of different countries and they end up making leather goods, and the Irish go to all sorts of different countries and they make liquor or booze or something, and the Jews go to all sorts of different countries and they become jewelers or whatever. Different folk have different excellences, and why should we solve it? Now, there was a survey of Apple and Microsoft and people like that, and how many blacks are there? How many blacks are employed, not as janitors or, cleaning the floors or something, but as nerds, computer programmers, whatever. Now, blacks are 14% of the population, and the hiring of blacks in these companies is less than 1%. Which would be similar to selling an iPod. Namely, blacks are not noted as computer experts. They're noted for other excellences, but not that. And to solve that, I guess you'd have to, give whites and Orientals and Indians who are very good, not native Indians, but Indians from India who are very good at computers. You'd have to give them the headphones that make them have a headache so they couldn't be good nerds. And then blacks would be able to compete better, relatively speaking. But I don't really regard that as a problem to be solved any more than I regard it as a problem to be solved that blacks are disproportionately overrepresented in the NBA and the NFL. That's not a problem. It's just different strokes for different folks. Different people are excellent at different things. And
is it different though with that group specifically because of slavery? Like, does that not change things a little bit in the sense that here they came at least, generations ago against their will, let's assume, and they're here and, they continue to be here. And I'm just wondering, as far as just the whole relationship between the state and black individuals because of slavery, like, doesn't that then make a case for, I don't know, whether reparations or whether just something to help, again, because it's different than I would think than an Oriental who's here, who's been here, who didn't have slavery generations ago, that their parents might be one up, they might be more educated. And so that generational shift, because that happens everywhere where, when one person's educated, their child's more likely to be educated, and that's going to keep going on. So aren't they already at a downfall there?
A disadvantage.
Disadvantage, yes.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you there, and I have several articles written about reparations for blacks, and I agree that they should have reparations. My view is, but the reparations shouldn't be affirmative action. Namely, we shouldn't say, well, Microsoft's got to hire more black people or anything like that. Because, Microsoft didn't do anything. Bill Gates wasn't a slave owner. My view on reparations is, in 1865, when slavery ended, what should have happened is we should have had an ex post facto law, namely, slavery is an abomination and it's punishable, and anyone who enslaved anyone else should now be a slave. Got it? So the white slave master should now be a slave to his ex-slaves. They should be his owner. And naturally, all of his property, slaves can't own property. So all of the white previous slave owners' property should go to the slaves. Now, that obviously didn't happen. Right. However, the plantation somewhere in South Carolina or Louisiana or Mississippi, that plantation should have been given to the slaves. And let's say that the slave master died now. But he gave it to his white son, who gave it to his white grandson and white great-grandson. And now there's some white guy in Mississippi who owns a plantation. And there were 500 slaves, say, on that plantation. Well, each one of them deserves 1/500th of that, 10,000-acre plantation. That would be my view.
That's interesting. So the claim is actually against the owner, the private individual, not the state.
The guy who committed the crime of slave owning.
That's a good answer. Okay.
He was a slave owner. Now, it was true, it was legal, but I don't care about that. I care only about libertarian law. So I'm in favor of ex post facto law, as I was for Nuremberg, Germany. The Nazis saying, well, that was the law. We had to kill Jews.
Real quick, because I had a discussion with someone else. So does that open the door then for, let's say, statute of limitations for like a battery or something that happened 100 years ago? Or is this just an exception that you're creating?
No, I don't think there's any statute of limitations on justice.
Okay, so
But the burden of proof, I mean, possession is 9/10 of the law. The burden of proof is on the person who wants to change the property titles.
the plaintiff.
So if there's some black guy in Harlem who has some sort of proof that his great-grandfather was a slave on this Mississippi plantation, and there were, say, 30 slaves there, he should get 1/30 of that plantation, and so on for every other black person who can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he's the great-grandson, because my assumption is that had justice prevailed in 1865 and this land was given to the black slaves, they would have given it to their kids. But the white guy gave it to his white kids. And now the white guy who's now in Mississippi, he's not a criminal. He's just the recipient of stolen goods that really belong to the black people. So he's not a criminal, but, he's not totally innocent either. But you see, there's no statute of limitations, but time gives in effect, it's harder to prove anything the longer the time goes by. But now take Japanese Americans whose land was stolen only in 1942 when we had records. See, the problem with the Indians, we stole Indian land too, but they had no written language, and it's further back and it's harder to prove. Whereas blacks, there was a language, with the white owners had a language, and whereas the Japanese in 1942, obviously there was a language and it's much more recent, and they would have a much better chance for reparations. But look, if you can prove something from 5,000 years ago, as far as I'm concerned, there's no statute of limitations. But you see, the problem with affirmative action is now you're taking innocent people. You and I, we've never owned a slave. And now they're saying you have to buy the iPad from the black guy. The heck? Why? And then you get into all sorts of problems. That a lot of the black people now in this country weren't the children of slaves. They came over from Africa in 1919 or something like that. And then a lot of white people, their grandparents didn't come here until the 20th century. Like my grandparents came here in 1909. There was no slavery here then. So affirmative action, I think, is unjust, but reparations are just. But we're getting a little bit off the point. See, the implication is that the reason that blacks are not good at math is because their grandparents were slaves. And I was going on that assumption. But, we can question that assumption because, black people in Africa who were never slaves, or at least never slaves in the U.S. anyway, or never slaves, period, they're not all that good at math. So it's a bit of a leap of faith to say that the reason that blacks in the U.S. are not that great in math or computers or whatever it is, or solving quadratic equations, is because of slavery. It's a reach, and it's certainly unproven. And I personally doubt that. I think there are other sources of their inability to do math, and there are other sources of Jewish people not being able to play basketball. It's not because the Nazis did anything. It's because they don't have springs in their legs. Although in the early days of the NBA, Red Auerbach, and there were some Jewish players, but they weren't jumping jacks like the black people are.
Okay, and so let's assume we had our anarchist society, right, where we had arbitrators, I suppose. I guess let's just assume there would be some sort of court system that would be private, and it would be arbitrators, maybe where you'd have a judge. I don't know if there'd be juries or whatever, but let's just assume that there'd be a judge. And I'm wondering, how do you handle some of the, like, I guess here, so it's stop and frisk, okay? So this is just a statistic where courts in New York City, they dismissed about 75% of the cases with white defendants, but when it was black defendants, it was only half that were dismissed. So let's just assume that that's true. I mean, you'd have to assume that a lot of these facts are true. I'd assume that it at least be 5% or like some difference. Okay, I think we could agree on that.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm just wondering, because maybe not 25% difference, but at least something. And I'm wondering how would you fix that? Because again, that's you're going to have something that's going to result from the arbitration that's going to be unfair and disadvantageous to that one group. And I'm figuring, again, what's the best way to, because the way I keep seeing everything, and when you talk to this stuff with progressives, again, the whole point of everything is to try to fix things. So what's the best way to handle it? And so I'm wondering, what would be the best way for us to handle these arbitrators?
Well, what you're talking about is racial profiling.
Right.
Right. The best way to fix that is to have the same crime rates of blacks and whites. Look, the reason they're profiling is because blacks have a much higher, disproportionate amount of crime. And there is one way to fix that, and that's to legalize drugs.
But see, but a lot of that though. But with stop and frisk, the statistics show that it's more blacks who are being arrested, so they're being stopped. Even though whites, like I forget exactly what it was, but whites actually had, like, proportionate, they had more bad stuff, more contraband on them than blacks. It just, there weren't as many whites that were stopped.
Yeah, but the reason it's rational and it's sensible to stop more blacks than to stop whites is the same reason it's rational to pick a black kid in a college campus to dunk a basketball. Look, suppose I told you that.
No, but see, my problem with, and I get what you're saying, but my problem is, it's like saying then that what about in white neighborhoods? We're then saying that they're all following the laws, or it's the same. You know, I've seen the meme, a picture on Facebook or something. We even showed it on our page, where you could have people wait out of Wall Street and go up to these Wall Street bankers who are violating laws, and you could do the same thing. It could be the same sort of stop and frisk with them, saying that they need to show their documents to make sure that they're not breaking any law. And I would agree that you'd probably find a lot of people who are violating the law, just like you would in a white neighborhood who are doing drugs that maybe just aren't getting caught, right? So I guess you're making this. Or go ahead.
Well, let's take the case of fraud, financial fraud. I agree with you that they should stop and frisk. Well, not stop and frisk, but they should get their spectacles on white people, because white people and Jewish people are disproportionately engaged in financial fraud. And it would be stupid to go to spend a lot of resources looking at black people and say, hey, black person, are you guilty of financial fraud? Because most of them are not.
Right.
But it would be very rational to engage in white profiling if you're looking for financial fraud, because white people do a disproportionate amount of financial fraud, but black people do a disproportionate amount of other kinds of crime, the kind that you stop them in the street. I mean, you don't stop people in the street for white finance. You look at their books. Right. You monitor them. The IRS gets them. Whoever what do you call it? The monitoring group for the stock exchange,
SEC,
FTC, any of those groups, they would be silly if they spent a lot of accountants' time looking at black books, financial records, because blacks, I'm sure they do some, but they do a disproportionately less amount. So I favor racial profiling in both cases. See, I'm an equal opportunity racist. Well, not racist, but an equal opportunity profiler. Namely, the profiling should be proportionate to the people who are likely to be guilty of a crime. So when you're looking at people who hold up people with a gun, you look at black people because they disproportionately do that. When you're looking at financial crime, you look at white people, because they do more of that disproportionately, always in proportion to the overall population. So I don't think it's anything you should cure. Look, in an airline, what they'll do, they'll frisk babies. They'll frisk 90-year-old black grandmas. Black grandmas don't blow up planes. Who's blowing up planes? It's guys from the Middle East, right? So you shouldn't racially profile black people or white people or Oriental people if you're searching for who's going to blow up a plane. You should look at people who blow up planes. I mean, isn't that just common sense? I mean, if I were a policeman and I wanted to protect the airplane, I would look very carefully at a guy with the Arab dress or whatever it is, light-skinned brown people who are Arab looking, I would look more carefully at them than at you or I, or a black person, or I don't know, an Indian person or something like that. Namely, the profiling should be commonsensical. It should be focused on the guys who are more likely to commit the crime, whether it's white or black or maroon or green people or Martians or whatever it is. So there's nothing wrong with racial profiling per se. There's something wrong with trying to stop black people getting on a plane, because no black person ever blew up a plane. So, leave them alone would be a rational way of dealing with it.
And I'm assuming that your argument, too, would be against the state doing that stuff as well.
Oh, well, that goes without saying.
So we're just talking about private, because that makes sense. And then once you get the state involved, then the state shouldn't do any of this stuff, or should treat everyone the same, right?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm very comfortable saying the state shouldn't do any of this. The state shouldn't exist.
Me as well.
But, if you want the police to do a good job of the government police of protecting planes or protecting against vandalism or protecting against financial crime, if you want that, then I think even they should do that. But again, I would resort to the claim that they shouldn't do anything. Private people would do it a lot better. El Al, the Israeli airplane company, El Al Airlines, they have a lot of threats of blowing up planes, and they have one system of dealing with it. And maybe United would have a different system, and American Airlines would have a different system, and Singapore Airlines would have a different system. You see, right now with the TSA, you just have one system for everybody. And it comes from Washington, D.C., and maybe it's not the right system. Competition brings about a better product. Mm-hmm. So if El Al does it this way and Delta does it that way and somebody else does it that way, we'd learn more how to stop these people, these evil people that try to blow up planes with people on them. So I'm not for the government doing it, but if you stipulate that the government is going to do it, and now you add on another premise, we want them to do it successfully, well, then the implication is they should profile based on Arabs or the people who are blowing up planes. Not blacks or whites or Orientals, but people who are blowing up planes. I mean, if you want to stop people from blowing up planes, you look at people who've been blowing up planes.
Instead of babies, right?
It just seems so obvious.
Right. Okay. Well, that's all the questions I had, Dr. Block. Is there anything else you'd want to say? Or?
No, it's a pleasure. These are very good questions, and I enjoyed this interview. And you said I'm the second one, so I hope that you're successful in your operation.
All right. Thank you very much.